How does a simple request, a husband asked to give up his seat for a coworker, turn into the moment that destroys a marriage in front of everyone? What began as a harmless joke became the tipping point, unraveling secrets, exposing betrayals, and forcing me to justify every choice as my world collapsed. Can I still call him the villain when his quiet revenge is the only thing left people talk about? The moment I asked Ethan to switch seats at dinner, I thought I was being playful, modern, confident, the kind of woman who doesn't let insecurity dictate her friendships. What I didn't expect was the silence that followed, or the way my husband quietly stood up, placed his napkin on the table, and walked out of the restaurant without saying a single word. "Lenora, seriously," Marissa whispered, but she was smiling. "You just made your husband give up his seat for Jeremy." I laughed, trying to keep the mood light as Jeremy slid into Ethan's still warm chair beside me. "It's just a seat. Ethan doesn't mind, do you, babe?" But when I looked up, Ethan was already at the hostess station, probably paying our portion of the bill. "He's being dramatic," I said, waving my hand dismissively. "He'll get over it." Jeremy adjusted his tie and leaned closer. "Maybe I should go talk to him." "No, don't." I touched Jeremy's arm. "He needs to learn that marriage doesn't mean ownership. We're allowed to have friends." The truth was, Jeremy and I had been growing closer at work. Late nights on projects, coffee runs that turned into hour-long conversations, texts that had nothing to do with marketing campaigns. He made me feel interesting again, appreciated in ways Ethan hadn't in years. When Jeremy laughed at my jokes or complimented my presentations, I felt like the woman I used to be before marriage and motherhood dulled my edges. "You're right," Marissa said, raising her wine glass. "Ethan has always been a little possessive anyway." Had he been? I tried to remember specific instances, but mostly I just remembered him being quiet, present, but not really there. He'd come home from teaching high school math, help our 7-year-old Sophie with homework, and then retreat to his laptop or a book. When I talked about my day, he'd nod and make appropriate sounds, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere. "He's probably just tired," I said, more to convince myself than anyone else. "Sophie had a rough week at school, and you know how he worries." Jeremy's hand brushed mine as he reached for his water. "You're generous to make excuses for him. Most women wouldn't be so understanding." The compliment warmed me more than it should have. When was the last time Ethan had called me generous, or understanding, or anything beyond honey in that distracted tone he'd developed over the past few years? We finished dinner without Ethan, and I found myself relaxing in ways I hadn't in months. Jeremy was attentive, asking about my opinions on everything from the restaurant's ambiance to my thoughts on the new campaign we'd been developing. He remembered details about conversations we'd had weeks ago, referenced inside jokes from the office, made me feel seen. "I should probably head home," I said finally, checking my phone. No text from Ethan. "Sophie will be wondering where we are." "Let me walk you to your car," Jeremy offered. In the parking lot, under the soft glow of streetlights, Jeremy turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Lenora, I hope I didn't cause problems between you and Ethan tonight." "You didn't cause anything," I said firmly. "If Ethan has a problem with me having male friends, that's his issue to work through." Jeremy smiled. "You're amazing, you know that. So confident and self-assured. Ethan is lucky to have you." I drove home with Jeremy's words echoing in my mind. When was the last time Ethan had told me I was amazing? When had he last seemed to appreciate what he had? The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Ethan's car was there, but all the lights were off except Sophie's nightlight glowing from her bedroom window. I found a note on the kitchen counter. "Sophie's asleep. I'm in the guest room. We'll talk tomorrow." But it was the wedding ring sitting next to the note that made my stomach drop. I picked it up, turning the simple gold band over in my fingers. We'd bought matching rings at a small jewelry store downtown. Nothing fancy but meaningful at the time. Now it felt cold and foreign in my palm. This was Ethan being dramatic again, I told myself, making a statement about a simple seating arrangement. He'd probably put it back on in the morning, after he'd had time to cool down and think rationally about how ridiculous he was being. I placed the ring back on the counter and headed upstairs. If Ethan wanted to sleep in the guest room over something so trivial, that was his choice. I wasn't going to chase after him and apologize for having friends, but as I lay in our empty bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the image of him walking out of that restaurant. There had been something final about it, something that felt less like a tantrum and more like a decision. I pushed the thought away. Ethan loved me. We had a daughter together, a life, a history. He wasn't going to throw all of that away because I'd asked him to switch seats with a coworker. Was he? Chapter 2. The weekend. He left Friday morning. Ethan was already gone when I woke up. His coffee mug sat washed and dried in the dish rack, and Sophie was eating cereal at the kitchen table, still in her pajamas. "Where's Daddy?" she asked, not looking up from her bowl. "He left early for work, sweetheart." I poured myself coffee and checked my phone. No messages from Ethan, but Jeremy had sent a good morning text with a funny meme about office life. I typed back quickly, "Exactly what I needed this morning. Thanks for making me smile." His response came immediately. "Always happy to brighten your day. Coffee later?" "Definitely." Sophie looked up at me with Ethan's serious brown eyes. "Are you and Daddy fighting?" "Of course not, baby. Why would you think that?" She shrugged, but I could see the worry lines forming between her eyebrows, the same expression Ethan got when he was working through a difficult problem. "Daddy seemed sad yesterday," she said quietly. I knelt beside her chair, smoothing her dark hair. "Sometimes adults have complicated feelings, but that doesn't mean we don't love each other. Daddy and I are fine." But even as I said it, I wondered if that was true. Ethan had been distant for months, maybe longer. When had we stopped really talking? When had our conversations become limited to logistics about Sophie's schedule and household maintenance? At work, Jeremy greeted me with my favorite latte from the coffee shop downstairs. "Thought you might need this after last night," he said with a concerned smile. "You're so thoughtful." I accepted the cup gratefully. Ethan was being weird about the whole thing, but he'll get over it. "Want to talk about it?" We ended up in the break room, and I found myself telling Jeremy things I hadn't admitted to anyone, maybe not even myself. How Ethan and I had been living like roommates instead of spouses. How he seemed more interested in his students' problems than in connecting with me. How I felt invisible in my own marriage. "You deserve better than that," Jeremy said softly. "You're vibrant and intelligent and beautiful. Any man would be lucky to have your attention." The compliment sent warmth through my chest. When was the last time Ethan had called me beautiful? When had he last seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings? That evening, Marissa called with perfect timing. "Girls' weekend at my place tomorrow night? I just got dumped by that architect, and I need my best friend and a bottle of wine." "I'd love to, but I should probably stay home with Sophie and Ethan." "Bring Sophie. She can sleep in my guest room, and we can have adult conversation after she goes to bed." I hesitated. Ethan and I needed to talk, but maybe some space would be good for both of us. Let him miss me a little, remember what he had. "Actually, you know what? Yes, we'll be there." When I told Ethan about the weekend plans, I expected him to protest or at least ask questions. Instead, he just nodded. "That sounds nice for you," he said in that neutral tone he'd been using lately. "I'll find something to do." "You could come with us," I offered half-heartedly. "No, you should have time with Marissa. I know how important your friendships are to you." There was something in his voice I couldn't identify. Not sarcasm exactly, but not sincerity either. "Are you sure you don't mind?" "I'm sure, Lenora. Have fun." Saturday morning, I packed bags for Sophie and me while Ethan made pancakes in the kitchen. The domesticity felt forced, like we were both playing roles in a marriage that had become more performance than partnership. We'll be back Sunday evening, I said, loading the car. Take your time, Ethan replied. Really? At Marissa's loft, Sophie settled in with her coloring books, while Marissa opened wine, and I found myself checking my phone constantly. Jeremy had sent several texts throughout the day, funny observations, questions about my weekend, photos of his coffee with messages like, thinking of you. Who are you texting? Marissa asked, refilling my glass. Just Jeremy. He's so sweet, always checking in. Marissa raised an eyebrow. Jeremy from work? The one Ethan got weird about? Ethan didn't get weird about Jeremy specifically. He got weird about me having any male friends. Marissa curled up on her couch. So what's really going on with you two? I found myself telling her everything. The growing distance with Ethan, the connection I felt with Jeremy, the way my marriage had become a series of obligations rather than a choice I made every day. Maybe Ethan is picking up on your feelings for Jeremy, Marissa suggested. I don't have feelings for Jeremy. He's a friend and colleague. Lenora, honey, you've checked your phone 12 times in the past hour, and you smile every time he texts. That's not just friends behavior. Was she right? I thought about Jeremy's attention, his compliments, the way he made me feel interesting and desirable. Was that friendship or something more? Even if I did have feelings, I said carefully, that doesn't mean I'd act on them. I'm married. But are you happy? The question hung in the air. Was I happy? When was the last time I'd felt genuinely excited to see Ethan? When had I last looked forward to our conversations or felt butterflies when he touched me? Marriage isn't about constant happiness, I said finally. It's about commitment and partnership and building a life together. That sounds like something you read in a self-help book, not something you actually believe. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Jeremy and I texted until nearly 2 a.m. Nothing inappropriate, just easy conversation that flowed naturally from topic to topic. He told me about his weekend plans, asked about mine, shared funny stories from his day. It felt effortless in a way my interactions with Ethan hadn't in years. Sunday morning, I called home to check in. The phone rang several times before Ethan answered. How's your weekend going? I asked. Fine, quiet. How's Marissa? Good. We're probably going to stay another night if that's okay. Sophie's having fun, and Marissa really needed this. There was a pause. Of course. Stay as long as you need. You don't mind? Lenora, I want you to do what makes you happy. Again, that strange tone, like he was saying more than his words conveyed. When we finally came home Sunday evening, the house felt different somehow, tidier. Ethan had cleaned thoroughly, done laundry, organized papers that had been sitting on the kitchen counter for weeks. It felt less like coming home, and more like visiting a house where we used to live. Daddy! Sophie ran to Ethan, who scooped her up with genuine joy. Watching them together, I felt a pang of something I couldn't name. Guilt, regret, loss? How was your weekend? I asked. Productive, Ethan said simply. I got a lot done. That night, as we went through our bedtime routine, everything felt mechanical. We brushed our teeth side by side at the bathroom sink without speaking. We got into bed and said goodnight without touching. Ethan fell asleep quickly, or pretended to, while I lay awake thinking about Jeremy's texts and Marissa's questions and the growing distance between my husband and me. Monday morning, Ethan was gone again before I woke up. But this time, when I went to make coffee, I noticed his closet door was open. Half his clothes were missing. The dresser drawers that had been full of his t-shirts and jeans now gaped empty. On the kitchen table, I found a stack of bills and financial documents, all organized with Ethan's characteristic precision. Bank statements, insurance papers, Sophie's school information. Like he was preparing for something, or preparing me for something. Chapter 3. The office affair. The missing clothes and organized papers should have been a wake-up call, but instead of confronting Ethan, I threw myself deeper into work and my growing friendship with Jeremy. If my husband wanted to play games and make dramatic gestures, fine. I had my own life to live. You seem different lately, Jeremy observed Tuesday morning as we walked to the coffee shop. More confident. It suits you. I've been thinking about what you said about not letting other people's insecurities limit me, I replied. Maybe I have been too accommodating. There's nothing wrong with knowing your worth. Over the following weeks, Jeremy and I fell into an easy routine. Coffee in the mornings, lunch meetings that stretched longer than necessary, staying late to work on projects that probably could have been finished during regular hours. Our conversations ranged from work topics to personal stories, shared frustrations and dreams. He told me about his divorce 3 years earlier, how his ex-wife had accused him of being emotionally unavailable. I found myself sharing details about my marriage that I'd never voiced before, how Ethan and I had grown apart, how we felt more like co-parents than partners, how lonely I felt even when we were in the same room. You're too vibrant to settle for loneliness, Jeremy said one evening as we sat in his office, ostensibly reviewing campaign materials. Life's too short to spend it with someone who doesn't appreciate what they have. Our desks were close enough that I could smell his cologne, see the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he leaned forward. When he handed me documents, our fingers would brush. When he laughed at my jokes, he'd touch my arm. Nothing overtly inappropriate, but charged with an energy that made my pulse quicken. At home, Ethan continued his strange new routine of being present but absent. He helped Sophie with homework, made dinner, handled household tasks with mechanical efficiency, but he barely spoke to me beyond logistics. When I tried to engage him in conversation, his responses were polite but distant. "How was your day?" I'd ask. "Fine. Yours?" "Good. Jeremy and I finished the Morrison account presentation." "That's nice." No follow-up questions, no interest in details, no engagement whatsoever. It was like living with a polite stranger who happened to share my last name. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from Jeremy. Good morning texts, funny memes during the day, thoughtful questions about my opinions on everything from movies to philosophy. He remembered details about conversations we'd had weeks earlier, asked about Sophie's school events, seemed genuinely interested in every aspect of my life. Your coworker seems very attentive, my mother Iris observed during one of our weekly phone calls. Jeremy's a good friend. It's nice to have someone to talk to. And Ethan, how is he? I paused, not sure how to explain the growing chasm in my marriage. He's fine, busy with work. Lenora, honey, are you happy? The same question Marissa had asked, and I still didn't have a good answer. I'm figuring things out, Mum. Just be careful. Sometimes when we're unhappy, we make choices that feel right in the moment, but cause more problems than they solve. But her warning felt distant compared to the immediate validation I got from Jeremy's attention. When he complimented my ideas in meetings, when he sought my opinion on projects, when he made me laugh until my sides hurt, I felt alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. The first time we almost kissed was a Thursday evening in late October. We'd been working late on a client presentation, and Jeremy had ordered dinner to his office. The overhead lights were off, just his desk lamp creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. You have incredible instincts, he said, reviewing my campaign concepts. This is brilliant work. You really think so? Lenora, you're one of the most talented people I've ever worked with, and one of the most beautiful. He was sitting close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. When he reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, I didn't pull away. We shouldn't, I whispered, even as I leaned closer. I know, he said, but he didn't move back. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Working late again. Sophie's asking for you. The spell broke. I pulled back, grabbing my purse and jacket. I have to go. Lenora, wait. I'm married, Jeremy. I can't. We can't. But driving home, my lips still tingled with the kiss that almost happened. And when I got home to find Ethan reading Sophie a bedtime story, I felt more like an intruder than a wife and mother returning to her family. The rumors started the following week. Whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the break room. Knowing looks from colleagues. Finally, Priya from HR asked to speak with me privately. Lenora, I need to address some concerns that have been brought to my attention regarding your relationship with Jeremy. My face burned. We work together. We're friends. There's nothing inappropriate happening. I'm not making accusations, Priya said carefully, but perceptions matter in a professional environment. Late nights, extended lunches, the amount of time you spend in each other's offices. People are talking. People always talk. That doesn't mean they're right. Just be mindful of appearances, okay? You're both valuable employees, and I'd hate to see either of your reputations suffer over misunderstandings. That afternoon, Jeremy pulled back noticeably. Our coffee runs became less frequent. He included other colleagues in meetings, where it had previously been just us. When I texted him, his responses were shorter, more professional. Are you avoiding me? I asked Friday afternoon. HR had a conversation with me too, he said quietly. Maybe we should keep things more professional for a while. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt abandoned. Ethan was emotionally absent, and now Jeremy was pulling away too. Where did that leave me? That weekend, Sophie's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, sent an email that made my stomach clench. Sophie has seemed distracted and withdrawn lately. She's mentioned that her daddy has been sad. Is everything okay at home? Please let me know if there's anything we can do to support her during this time. I found Sophie in her room, coloring at her small desk. Hey, sweetheart, Mrs. Patterson says you've been worried about Daddy. Sophie looked up with those serious brown eyes. He cries sometimes. What? At night when he thinks I'm sleeping. I heard him in the bathroom. My heart clenched. Daddy's just going through a hard time right now. Because you don't love him anymore? The question hit me like a physical blow. Sophie, honey, where did you get that idea? You don't look at him the way you used to, and you're always on your phone smiling at someone else. Out of the mouths of babes, if my 7-year-old could see what was happening, how obvious was it to everyone else? That night, I tried to talk to Ethan. Really talk, not just exchange logistics. Sophie thinks we're having problems, I said as we got ready for bed. Are we? He asked, not looking at me. I don't know. Are we? He finally met my eyes in the bathroom mirror. You tell me, Lenora. You're the one who's been checking out of this marriage. That's not fair. You've been distant for months. I've been distant. You asked me to give up my seat for another man. You spend more time texting your coworker than talking to your husband. You take weekend trips and seem relieved when I don't come along. His voice was calm, but I could see the pain in his eyes. When exactly was I supposed to not be distant? Jeremy is just a friend. Is he? The question hung between us. Was Jeremy just a friend? What would have happened if my phone hadn't buzzed that night in his office? What did I want to happen? Yes, I said, but the word felt hollow. Ethan nodded slowly. Okay. But I could tell he didn't believe me. And honestly, I wasn't sure I believed myself anymore. Chapter 4. Humiliation Goes Public. November brought a series of small humiliations that should have been warning signs. The first was at Sophie's school play, where I sat alone in the auditorium while other families clustered together. Ethan had said he'd try to make it, but his chair remained empty throughout the performance. After the show, other parents made polite conversation, but I caught the sideways glances, the whispered questions about where my husband was. When Sophie asked why Daddy hadn't come, I made excuses about his work schedule that felt thin even to me. At least Jeremy came, Sophie said, pointing to where my coworker sat 3 rows back. I turned, surprised. Jeremy waved and made his way over. I hope you don't mind, he said. You mentioned Sophie's play, and I was in the neighborhood. It was sweet, thoughtful even. but seeing him there, in the space where my husband should have been, felt wrong somehow. Other parents noticed too. I could feel their curious stares, their mental calculations about this attractive man who wasn't my husband, but clearly knew my daughter. "That was beautiful, Sophie," Jeremy said, crouching to her level. "You were the best tree in the forest." Sophie giggled, and I felt a confusing mix of gratitude and discomfort. Jeremy was being kind, filling a gap that Ethan had left, so why did it feel like a betrayal? The second humiliation came through social media. I'd posted a photo from the play, just me and Sophie, both smiling, with the caption, "My beautiful girl killed it tonight, so proud." Within hours, the comments started. "Where's Ethan? Trouble in paradise? Is that your work husband in the background? Some of us remember when you used to post family photos." I deleted the post, but the damage was done. People were watching, speculating, gossiping about the state of my marriage. And the worst part was, I couldn't deny their suspicions because I wasn't sure myself what was happening between Ethan and me. The third humiliation was professional. Despite Jeremy's attempts to maintain boundaries, our connection was obvious to anyone paying attention. During team meetings, we'd catch each other's eyes and share silent communications. We still grabbed coffee together, though less frequently. And when we disagreed with other colleagues' ideas, we'd instinctively back each other up. "You two are like a married couple," our colleague David joked during one particularly synchronized presentation. "Except they're not married to each other," added Sarah with a pointed look. The comment hung in the air awkwardly until Jeremy changed the subject, but I saw the knowing glances exchanged around the conference table. My professional reputation was becoming entangled with gossip about my personal life. Meanwhile, Ethan continued his pattern of polite distance. He helped with Sophie's homework, maintained the house, paid bills, attended to all the practical aspects of our shared life. But emotionally, he was gone. When I tried to engage him in conversation, he'd respond with the minimum necessary words. When I suggested we go out for dinner or watch a movie together, he'd politely decline or agree with such obvious reluctance that I'd rather he'd just said no. "Are you punishing me?" I asked one evening after Sophie had gone to bed. "For what?" he replied, not looking up from his laptop. "You know for what, for having a friend, for asking you to switch seats that one time, for whatever you think I've done wrong." He closed the laptop and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "I'm not punishing you, Lenora. I'm protecting myself." "From what?" "From hoping for something that isn't there anymore." His words stung because they contained a truth I wasn't ready to face. When had I stopped hoping for connection with Ethan? When had I started looking for validation elsewhere? "I'm still here," I said weakly. "Physically, yes, but the rest of you checked out months ago." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. Because he wasn't entirely wrong, was he? I had been checking out, emotionally and mentally. I had been finding excuses to spend time away from home, to stay late at work, to text Jeremy instead of talking to my husband. But whose fault was that? Ethan had been pulling away long before Jeremy entered the picture. He'd been distant and preoccupied, more interested in his students' problems than in connecting with his wife. I'd just responded to his withdrawal by finding connection elsewhere. The final humiliation came at Thanksgiving dinner at my mother's house. Ethan came, but he might as well have been a stranger I'd hired to play my husband. He was polite to my family, helped with dishes, made appropriate conversation. But there was no warmth between us, no casual touches or inside jokes or moments of connection. My sister Allison pulled me aside in the kitchen. "What's going on with you and Ethan? He seems like he's attending his own funeral." "We're going through a rough patch." "Because of your work boyfriend?" I nearly dropped the dish I was drying. "He's not my... How do you even know about Jeremy?" "Lenora, you post about him constantly. Jeremy said the funniest thing today." Jeremy and I killed that presentation. Jeremy brought me coffee. It's pretty obvious you have feelings for the guy. I do not have feelings for Jeremy. He's a colleague and friend. Does Ethan know that? I looked through the kitchen doorway to where Ethan sat at the dining table, listening politely to my uncle's story about his golf game. He looked tired, older somehow than he had a few months ago. Ethan knows exactly what Jeremy is to me, I said, but even as I spoke the words, I wondered if that was true. That night, driving home in silence while Sophie slept in the back seat, I tried to remember the last time Ethan and I had felt like a team. When had we stopped being partners and become just two people sharing space and responsibilities? "Thank you for coming today," I said quietly. "Of course, it's important to Sophie." Everything was about Sophie now. We were co-parents, not spouses. We were managing a household, not building a life together. "Ethan, what happened to us?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, "I think we stopped choosing each other." "What do you mean?" "Marriage is a choice you make every day. You choose to prioritize your spouse, to invest in the relationship, to work through problems together. Somewhere along the way, we both stopped making that choice." "I never stopped choosing you." He glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to the road. "Didn't you?" The question haunted me through the weekend. Had I stopped choosing Ethan? When I decided to stay late at work with Jeremy instead of coming home for dinner, was that a choice against my marriage? When I shared my thoughts and feelings with Jeremy instead of my husband, was that a betrayal of our partnership? When I found myself looking forward to Jeremy's texts more than Ethan's presence, had I already made my choice? Monday morning brought a calendar notification that made my blood run cold. Meeting, personal. Location, Schaefer & Klein, 14 Ho Cheon, Friday. I Googled the name. Schaefer & Klein was a law firm downtown that specialized in family law. Ethan was seeing a divorce attorney. Chapter 5. The Legal Trap. The knowledge that Ethan had consulted a lawyer should have terrified me, but instead it made me angry. How dare he make unilateral decisions about our marriage? How dare he plan our future without including me in the conversation? I confronted him that evening after Sophie went to bed. "Schaefer & Klein? Really, Ethan?" He didn't even look surprised that I'd seen the calendar entry. "You weren't supposed to have access to that calendar anymore." "So you are seeing a divorce lawyer?" "I'm exploring my options." "Without talking to me first?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "When exactly would we have that conversation, Lenora? Between your late nights at the office and your weekend trips with friends? Or maybe during one of our romantic dinners where you spend the entire time texting Jeremy?" "I don't spend the entire time." "Last Tuesday you checked your phone 17 times during dinner." I counted. The specificity of his observation unsettled me. "You were counting?" "I've been paying attention to a lot of things lately, like how you smile when you get texts from him, how you find excuses to mention his name in conversation, how you light up when you talk about work but barely make eye contact when you talk to me." "That's not—" "It's okay, Lenora. I understand. You're not happy with me, and you found someone who makes you feel the way I used to. I'm not going to fight for someone who doesn't want to be fought for." His calm acceptance was worse than anger would have been. "I never said I didn't want to be fought for." "You didn't have to say it. You've been showing me for months." That Friday, I showed up at Schaefer & Klein 15 minutes before Ethan's appointment. If he wanted to make decisions about our marriage, he was going to have to include me in the conversation. The receptionist looked confused when I asked to join Mr. Pelham's 2C appointment, but she buzzed the attorney's office and then directed me to a conference room. Ethan arrived precisely on time, stopping short when he saw me sitting at the polished wooden table. "Lenora, what are you doing here? This is my marriage too. If you're going to discuss ending it, I have a right to be part of that conversation." Attorney Rebecca Klein entered before Ethan could respond. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an expensive suit. Mrs. Pelham, I understand you'd like to join today's meeting. However, I should clarify that I represent your husband's interests, not yours. You may want to consider getting your own legal representation. I don't need a lawyer. I just want to understand what's happening. Ms. Klein looked at Ethan, who nodded reluctantly. Fine, but I want everything documented. She pulled out a thick folder and spread documents across the table. Bank statements, credit card records, phone bills, even printouts of my social media posts. Seeing my life laid out in legal documents was surreal and invasive. Your husband has documented a pattern of emotional infidelity, Ms. Klein said matter-of-factly. Late-night communications with a coworker, changes in behavior and priorities, emotional withdrawal from the marriage. Emotional infidelity isn't grounds for divorce, I said, though my voice sounded weak even to me. In Texas, we have no-fault divorce, so grounds aren't necessary. However, these factors could influence custody and asset division decisions. Custody. The word hit me like a physical blow. You want to take Sophie away from me? I want shared custody, Ethan said quietly. 50-50. She needs stability, and right now you're not providing that. I'm her mother, and I'm her father, the father who's been handling bedtime stories and homework help while you work late with Jeremy. The father who attended her school conferences alone because you were too busy. The father who held her while she cried about her parents fighting. Each accusation was like a knife twist because they were all true. I had been distracted, absent, more focused on my own emotional needs than my daughter's. Mrs. Pelham, Ms. Klein continued, your husband has also documented financial irregularities, unexplained charges at restaurants during times when he was at home with your daughter, hotel bar charges during your weekend trips. These suggest a pattern of deception. I stared at the bank statements, seeing my choices reflected in stark black and white. Expensive lunches with Jeremy, drinks after work, the hotel bar at Marissa's building where Jeremy and I had met for one quick drink that turned into 3 hours of conversation. I never cheated on you, I said desperately. Physically? Maybe not, Ethan replied, but emotionally, you've been gone for months. You've shared more of yourself with Jeremy than you have with me. You've prioritized his company over mine, his opinions over mine, his attention over mine. That's not true. Ethan pulled out his phone and began reading. Jeremy is so insightful about the Morrison account. I don't know what I'd do without his perspective. He looked up. You posted that on Facebook. When was the last time you said something like that about me? I couldn't remember. He continued. Had the best conversation today about life goals and dreams. So grateful for people who really listen. Another post. When did we last have a conversation about life goals, Lenora? You never seemed interested. I stopped seeming interested when you stopped including me. When you started taking your problems to Jeremy instead of your husband. When you started seeking validation from him instead of working on our marriage. Ms. Klein cleared her throat. Mr. Pelham has prepared a preliminary custody and asset division proposal. Mrs. Pelham, I strongly recommend you review this with your own attorney before responding. She slid a document across the table. The words blurred as I tried to read them. 50-50 custody, division of assets, spousal support calculations, the dissolution of everything we'd built together, reduced to legal terms and financial formulas. This doesn't have to be adversarial, Ethan said. I'm not trying to punish you. I just want us both to be free to find happiness with people who actually want to be with us. I do want to be with you. No, Lenora, you want the security and stability I provide, but you want the excitement and validation Jeremy gives you. You want both, and that's not fair to anyone. The truth of his words was devastating because I couldn't deny them. I did want both, the safety of my marriage and the thrill of Jeremy's attention. I wanted to keep my family intact while also exploring this connection that made me feel alive again. What if I stopped seeing Jeremy? What if I focused on fixing our marriage? Ethan looked at me with something that might have been pity. It's too late for that. You've already shown me who you choose when you have to choose. And it's not me. The meeting ended with me clutching divorce papers and a business card for a family law attorney. In the elevator, I stared at my reflection in the polished metal doors. When had I become this person? When had I become someone who could hurt the man who'd loved me, who'd built a life with me, who'd given me a beautiful daughter? Outside the building, Ethan paused on the sidewalk. For what it's worth, he said, I did love you. I love the woman you were when we got married, and I love the woman you became when Sophie was born. But I can't love the woman you've chosen to be now. He walked away, leaving me standing alone on the busy downtown street, divorce papers in my hand, and the ruins of my marriage scattered around my feet. Chapter 6. Dignity Restored. The divorce papers sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days while I tried to figure out how to salvage my life. I called in sick to work, unable to face Jeremy and the questions in his eyes. I avoided my mother's phone calls and Marissa's texts. I moved through the house like a ghost, going through the motions of motherhood while my world crumbled around me. Ethan continued his routine as if nothing had changed, which somehow made everything worse. He made Sophie breakfast, helped with homework, read bedtime stories. He was present and engaged with our daughter while maintaining polite distance from me. "Mommy, why are you sad?" Sophie asked Wednesday evening, climbing into my lap as I sat staring at the legal documents. "Sometimes grown-ups go through difficult times, sweetheart." "Is it because you and Daddy are getting divorced?" The question stopped my heart. "Who told you that word?" "Emma's parents got divorced last year. She said they had papers like those." Sophie pointed at the documents spread across the coffee table. I gathered the papers quickly, but it was too late. My 7-year-old had already connected the dots. "Are you and Daddy going to live in different houses?" I looked across the room to where Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway, listening. His expression was unreadable, but I could see the pain in his eyes when he looked at Sophie. "We're figuring things out," I said finally. That night, after Sophie was asleep, I tried one last time to reach Ethan. "We could try counseling," I suggested. "We could work on this." "Lenora, you don't want to work on this. You want to avoid the consequences of your choices." "That's not true. Isn't it? You haven't stopped texting Jeremy. You haven't taken responsibility for your part in destroying our marriage. You haven't even apologized." He was right. I'd been so focused on defending myself, on minimizing my actions, that I hadn't actually acknowledged the pain I'd caused. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "For what, specifically?" For asking you to move that night at dinner." "That's not what destroyed our marriage, and you know it." "Then for what?" Ethan sat down across from me, and for a moment, he looked like the man I'd married, vulnerable and hopeful, and willing to fight for us. "For choosing Jeremy over me, every day in 1,000 small ways. For sharing your thoughts and feelings with him instead of your husband. For lighting up when you talk about him and shutting down when you talk to me. For making me feel like a stranger in my own marriage." The weight of his words settled over me. "I never meant to hurt you." He said I'd dismissed his pain as jealousy, then used his distance as permission to lean into Jeremy. I couldn't argue, because I'd rewritten our history to make Ethan the villain. When I offered to quit my job and cut Jeremy off, Ethan shook his head. This wasn't about Jeremy anymore. It was about trust. At work, Jeremy waited with coffee and comfort, the old doorway back into excuses. I finally refused it, and ended whatever we'd been pretending was just friendship. An attorney told me Ethan's terms were fair. I realized I feared consequences more than I loved the marriage. I signed. Months later, he moved on for good.